So, hi everyone. Thank you very much for joining this session, Tales of a Mobile DevOps. My name is Nicola Corti. I also want to mention that you can follow up on Slack if you join the channel session chat D2S1T2. I'll be happy to hang out with you folks. If you have any other question, feel free to reach out to me. Also on Twitter, that's mandatory slide about myself. I work as Android infrastructure engineer. It means that I basically develop tools, SDK, and libraries for the Android engineer. My Twitter handle is Cortinico, and you can find me on GitHub with the same username. And those are my hobbies. I really love to do also a lot of open source. So you can find me on GitHub. Feel free to reach out over there if you want to collaborate. I have a lot of libraries and not so much time to spend on that. So I'm always looking for collaborators. I also work as infra engineer at Spotify. But today I'm not going to talk about that. Like, this is my personal talk, and I want to share you some experience. And today we're going to talk about mobile DevOps or mobile infra. So let's get started. If you go online and search for the definition of DevOps, you will not find it. You will not find an exact definition of DevOps. You will find like a variation of sentences. And this is one that I found like on the Google Cloud website. And it says an organizational and cultural movement that aims to increase software delivery velocity, improve service reliability, and build shared ownership among software stakeholders. Amazing. But like, if you take any other definition of DevOps, you will see that all of them, they generally have the cultural word in the middle. So DevOps is all about culture. So is also mobile DevOps. It's all about culture. It all starts from there. And as a byproduct of culture, actually, you end up having the development. So the actual code, writing the code, and also a product that in the case of mobile developers is generally like a mobile app, so an Android or iOS app. Obviously, code and product are really connected by itself. But again, they both derives from the culture. Like, you need to have a strong foundation to be able to write code and actually ship it to your users. So today I will walk you through what is the culture. So who is the people that are building something, what they're building, and why they're actually building it. So I will want to start from the culture. So the DevOps culture, the mobile DevOps culture. And so I want to stress one important point here on the culture. And I want to mention that like a strong DevOps culture should be built by everyone. Like, it's not up to a specific group of people, but it's the group of all of your people that are developing your app that are responsible of building it. Generally, however, is driven by platform teams or core teams. And we will see what does it mean. I want to mention that DevOps culture and a development culture in general should be based on shared responsibility. So you should not like blame certain teams because things are not working great. Generally, like, there will be teams and ownership, but like building a DevOps culture should be like responsibility of everyone. The culture should be built necessarily blameless. Like, you should not build a culture where like you invite people to point fingers against others. And also my motto here, to summarize what I generally want to express with mobile DevOps culture, is be a shepherd, not a gatekeeper. We will see why. But first, let me spend some seconds on platform teams. So who is the platform team? So like, at the beginning, like if your company is in a startup level, you will generally have like a small number of mobile developers, like 3, 4, 5, not so many. And you will end up having tasks that are responsible of the core or the infrastructure of your application, like setting up a CI system, setting up a testing infrastructure. So when your company is really small, when you're like at this startup level, you don't really have a platform team. It's just like responsibility of someone that is maybe more passionate about those kind of topics to be responsible of driving this effort forward. Then once your team, like your company grows, you have more teams. You might end up like having feature teams. So specific features responsible of certain parts of your application. Maybe you have like a team for the login screen, and then you have like a team for the profile screen and whatsoever. At this level, you still might not have a dedicated platform team, but you probably have a group of people that are really passionate about infra and DevOps related topic. Again, setting up the CI, setting up the testing infra, whatsoever. And generally the setup is having like a common backlog of tasks that are shared across those teams with something like maybe a weekly rotation where developers can collaborate and work on this kind of infra and DevOps tasks. So the natural evolution of this setup is actually having a dedicated platform team. This means having like a single team that is responsible of all the platform related tasks. So this is generally called like the Android platform team or the core team or the foundation team. And they're responsible of building like all the tools that are needed from all the other feature teams to work properly. So the other feature teams generally like interact with this core team in a like client server interface, so to say. The next step is, the last step is when your company really grows significantly, you might end up in this functional platform team setup. So it means that you have multiple platform teams that are responsible of separate areas of your infrastructure. So you might have like a platform team that is responsible only of the build, another platform team that is responsible of the app architecture, another for testing, and so on. And other non-infrastructure team that interact each other and they self-organize in, so every team can go to the other team to request specific capabilities if they need it to build their specific feature. So why I'm telling you this? Because sometimes you might end up in situations where like other developers come up with questions like, hey, how about we introduce this new Shiny library that I saw at Android Summit? Or how about this new framework? I want to give it a try. Oh, there is a new programming language out there. Why don't we try it? Or I would love to bump this library to the next major version because there are a lot of like amazing features. And sometimes you end up in a situation where the platform team behaves in this way, like you shall not pass. And here I want to reinforce what I said before. Be a shepherd, not a gatekeeper. Sometimes it's up to the platform team to actually be a gatekeeper and block a lot of questions and requests coming from other developers. But it's also important to be a culture around it and be a shepherd. Like, hey, how about one member of the platform team collects this kind of feedback, and maybe we can start like a new document, a new RFC. We can start collecting feedback, do a prototype, and evaluate how those new tools might fit inside our ecosystem. So this is more or less all about culture. Now I want to move over a little bit on the development front, and specifically how the development, how mobile DevOps entangles the development, and also how the development is connected to the culture. Because as we can see, a lot of steps in the development process are strictly connected to having a strong culture behind. And so for the development, I identified 5 steps, and we will work through all of them. So the first step is actually writing the code. So developing means writing source code. And I like to think as the source code as a form of ownership. So the first point is like, yeah, we all write source code. We have a common code base, but like, how do we track ownership of it, and how do we share it? So how do I know which specific modules are responsible of, like, are owned by a certain team rather than others? This is crucial because sometimes you end up in situation where like, hey, there is this feature, this is legacy, and who is owning it? No one knows. Even worse, like sometimes you want to share the code. How do you set up code sharing? Like if you don't have support for code sharing, you might end up with feature team siloed in their own universe, not knowing about other feature and rewriting the same functionality twice. So it's really important that a mobile DevOps team and a mobile DevOps culture is able to drive like ownership across the code base and have like a bigger picture overview of what's going on in your code base. Specifically on this front, a movement that has gained a lot of traction recently is this concept of monorepo versus polyrepo. So monorepo, the idea behind monorepo is having like a single repository with all the code inside. So like all the mobile apps, like you have 10 Android apps, all of them inside there, or Android and iOS code together, or all the code owned by the company in the same monorepo. There are like success stories for it, but also failure stories. So it's up to you and your mobile infra team to decide if this is the tool that might help you give stronger ownership of your code and help you with code sharing. Also think about multi-platform development. You might end up in situations where you have like code that is shared between different apps like Android and iOS, and you want to share it somehow. To which extent of multi-platform development you want to invest in? That's decisions that should be taken generally by those platform teams, but maybe you want the rest of the company and tech community to take part of it. That's why having a strong culture is fundamental to make sure that those decisions are taken correctly. And also my suggestion on this front is try to spend time also monitoring the developer performances. Specifically, like if you're using Gradle, there are tools like Gradle Enterprise or Gradle Profiler that will help you understand how your developers are doing. Like how about having like a ranking of the slowest developer and let them upgrade their machine just to make sure that they're happy and you're just like saving time and giving a better developer experience to your developers. The last point is make sure you spend also some time if you are in one of this platform team, make sure you spend some time in IDE optimization, like specifically IntelliJ has a really lot of tool and documentation on how to build plugins. Sometimes building a plugin could help you automatize a lot of steps that your developers are doing daily. So that might be like a good resource to look into. So the next point is the merge. So your developers are writing code, and then at a certain point, they need to reach the same code base and be merged together. And I like to think as merge as a form of collaboration. Specifically, one of the most important points before merging is actually the code review process. So if you don't have a code review process, I really strongly invite you to make sure you have something set up and also that you build a great culture around it. You have no idea of how many comments I saw, like also open source on GitHub, they are just pointless. And, or like they blame the author and they're like, they're sort of like, they tend to be somehow offensive. So it's up to you, to your company, to the platform team to build a strong culture around code review and make sure that everyone feels welcome to give a feedback and also to give constructive feedback. Make sure you have like a continuous integration solution in place. And also think about merge queues. Have you like, once your company grows, you might end up in situations where like merging at the same time two commits, two pull requests together might land your state, it might land your code base in a broken state. Maybe they like the CI checks on those two pull requests were green, but the combination of those two changes applied one on top of the other results in a broken code base. Like if this happens frequently, that's really annoying because you're like, interrupting your developer's workflow and you need to prevent it. So think about tools like mergequeue.com or others like something custom might also work to make sure that this process doesn't break. In the Android world, what is crucial is also having tools like artifact analyzers. For example, tracking APK size or methods count or whatsoever. Like inform your developers early on at just before merging that something is wrong with their PR, and don't wait don't wait at release time to discover that your APK size grew exponentially. You need to inform your developers early on that something is going wrong. And also one point that is crucial in mobile is also localization. You probably want to make sure your app is localized properly, and you don't want to ship feature on the markets that are half localized. Like, I don't know, all the screens are available in English, and then you have if you change language to Spanish, you have only like 20% of the app is localized. That's not cool. So you want to make sure that once code it's master or main, that code is actually localized properly. So you need to interact with your localization tool using tools like the one I mentioned here to make sure that the feature that it's main is localized properly. So the next step is the analyze, and that's actually one of my favorite. And it's the step where you can run static analyzer and linter to understand how the code base and the PR will look like from the quality point of view. And I like to think as to linters and static analyzers as a form of education. Like, I think they're a great tool to drive a lot of teaching and learning inside your organization. So specifically on Android, I really like to use tools like error-prone or detect. Detect is great, for example, for Kotlin, to enforce patterns or anti-patterns that you want to be used or you want to prevent them inside your code base. Also, running static analyzers can be a great tool to understand the health of your code base. Like, you might run checks that counts the complexity of certain areas or discovers which area are more legacy than others. Those are the areas where you probably need to do more work in the near future. And they can help you planning how to take care of the health of your code base. Also, custom rules. Again, they're great if you have a specific pattern that you want to make sure that are enforced inside your organization. And also think about your dependencies. Like, really, we could make an entire talk about dependencies and dependency scanning, but we use a lot of code from third parties. And we want to make sure that the code that comes from third parties is good. So first, that it doesn't contain malicious code. Second, we might want to be interested in which kind of license is used. So you probably need to make sure that you have the proper tooling on that front. And you just don't want to pull in random libraries from the web without knowing what's inside. The next step is test. And I like to think to tests as a form of trust. So I want to be able to go to bed and sleep well. Like, I don't want to think that I shipped something to the market without tests, because they might just blow up because of me. And specifically on mobile, there are like a different variety of tests, like unit test, integration test, and also UI test. So make sure you have some of them. Like, you probably know the testing pyramid. Like, you don't need to bloat your code base with a lot of UI tests. That will slow your testing so much, but you need to have some critical parts of your app that are tested. Specifically, think about solutions like test filtering. You might, and like when the number of your UI tests grows a lot, you might end up in situation where you want to run certain type of tests when you're merging, and then others when you're creating a new release. So these allow you to be like more flexible and decide specifically which test suite to run, to don't slow down the developer too much, and also to reduce the cost of you running so many tests on like third-party services like Firebase Test Lab. And also another crucial part, and actually another crucial problem on Android and on mobile in general is flaky tests. Like, you will generally have flaky tests. I think it's basically impossible to get rid of them, but it's fundamental that your platform team or infra team have tooling for like identifying tests, and maybe find some mechanism to to mitigate the impact. Specifically, something that could be done is, how about you define a threshold and rerun the tests like X times. For example, you could say like, hey, this is a flaky test. The threshold is 80%. So I will rerun it 10 times. And if it fails like more than 20%, because the threshold is 80, then I consider this test broken. So think about methodologies like this one to mitigate the impact of flaky test. So the last step is measure. Like, you need to understand what your users are doing, and you need to have some sort of analytics. And I like to think of analytics as a form of awareness. Like, your developers are building a feature, but they also need to understand which part of your app are used the most, and how generally what's the behavior of your user. And again, here there are a variety of tools that you can use. But I also want to mention that you should also think about timing metrics. So how long does the app takes to start up? Or what is the slowest network request that your app is doing? That helps you understand how fast is your application, and you should just keep on constantly checking those metrics, because they're, again, helpful for the app health, but also they give insights to your developers on what your application is actually doing. I think it's crucial for developers to understand, for example, hey, on the average, how long is your app taking to start? I think, like, sometimes you might just ask this question to other unknown engineer and they might not know the answer because they just don't think about it. Or maybe because their developer experience is so distant from the user experience that I think it's crucial to reconnect them to what's the actual user experience, what your users are seeing, and you need metrics to fully understand what you're using, like are experiencing. So the next step, as I said before, so culture, development, and now the product. So it's actually time to hit the market, like create something that gives value to our users. So on the product and actually on reaching the market, again, there are a variety of talks and content, but really I want to mention some techniques or tools that I really appreciated and that I used in the past, and I think they're valuable. And if you don't have them, make sure like you at least think about it, or you have like different approaches to those problems. So the first one is release trains. Like, you need to release your app often. Like, you can't release once every, 6 months. You need to release often. So with release trains, I mean something like that. So you have your app, you have a production line, and you have a version 140, and you just keep on releasing. So you have a lot of other version of your app, and they all have like their own version number. And this means that you don't need to wait for a feature to be fully released. You just release every week, every other week, every month, I don't know, but you release with regularly. This allows you to have like also a beta line that is completely aligned with the prod line. So for example, when version 142, it's prod, the week before 141 was in prod. But at the same time, 142 was in beta. And this allows you also to have an alpha line. And so the 142 was in alpha when 140 was in prod and 141 was in beta. So you always have this constant release cycle where you always have one up in alpha, one in beta, one in prod. I mean, this is an example. You might have multiple lines. You might release every week, every other week. But again, the idea is release on a regular basis, every 1 or 2 weeks. Also, I want to mention a couple of things. First, version numbers are free. Use them. Don't be afraid. And the second thing is like, you are not, you don't have a public API. When you're releasing an Android app, you should not follow strong semantic versioning. Specifically, use version numbers that are useful for you. like this one, 140, 141, 142 might just be the number of the week, like when that release was created. Use the timestamp. Use the SHA of the commit in the version name, because that allows you to understand when the app was built. Like that's not strong semantic versioning, but it's sort of like useful versioning for you to be able to understand what the app is doing. Then I want to mention a couple of tools that I think are crucial for the release lifecycle. And if you don't have like those steps, I think either you're really small and you will need it in the near future, or you should really think about your release lifecycle because you could have had problem in the past. So the first point is a distribute. So you want to find a way to send your app on the market, or anyway, to your users. And your users could be your like consumer users, so the user on the Play Store, or it can be like your testers or your internal employee because you want to release it to them. So here you can use tools like Bitrise, Google Play, or Firebase App Distribution to make sure that your app reach your users so they have it. Then you need a way to remotely configure. Like you need to find a way to have like, feature flags, rollouts, whatsoever, but you need to have really a way to remotely control the app, because in the mobile world, if something goes really bad, if things goes on fire, yeah, you can create a new version, but still your previous version is the market. So you need to have a way to shut down if things are burning really hard. So specifically using built-in, like already built solution, like Firebase Remote Config, Mixpanel, or Rollout.io can help you just set up something simple, but that gives you the power to shut down and control specific part of your application if something goes on fire. Then the next step, you need to have the infra to be able to detect or observe what your application is doing. Specifically, like is your app on fire? Like you need to know if something is really wrong on that front. So tools like Firebase Crashlytics, Instabug, or Bugsnag are great tool to like just, get an overview of how many times your application is crashing. But detecting is not just this. Like sometimes you might need different kind of metrics. For example, you want to know how many times the home screen was shown. And then you probably need tools like Splunk or other logging mechanism to be able to remotely report from the app to your infrastructure how many times certain events happened. Like really, you might have health metrics that are not necessarily crash. So for example, if your users are not seeing a certain banner on the home screen, that might mean that that screen is not shown at all, and you might want to investigate what's going on. Then once you detect that something is really odd, you need to find a way to respond. So you need to wake up the people that are responsible and they have the capability of making a change in the configuration or distribute a new version of the app to fix the problem. Specifically, like you need to have tools like PagerDuty or VictorOps that allows you to have like on-call mechanism. But if you don't want to like over-engineerize everything, you might just set up like a workflow on Slack that pings people randomly if certain numbers are too high or above the threshold. And then I think one of the crucial tool to end up to this diagram is once things are like solved and you ended up like resolving the problem and your app is working fine, it's not crashing anymore, you need to write a postmortem. Like you need to make sure that there is a culture around reporting what happened with a clear timeline, with like an explanation of why this was possible. And again, here culture plays a fundamental role. Like this should not be you should not point a finger against someone else, because maybe it could just be a junior developer that forgot to add like a line in the configuration file. Everything can happen. We are human. But writing a postmortem is a great tool to drive ownership in your company, learn new things and teach them to others. and just learn from mistakes that you did in the past and adapt your infra to make sure that that problem will not happen again. So make sure that when things goes on fire in a company, there is sort of like a postmortem guideline and people are following that somehow. So now it's time to recap. As I said, it all started from the culture, and from the culture, I mentioned that development and product are sort of like, side effect or byproduct of the culture. But today I also gave you a lot of examples on how the development with tools like code reviews, linters, and tests can reinforce the culture. And the product with tools like release trains and postmortems can reinforce the culture again. So it's not a one-way cycle. It's actually from culture that you're able to develop and to ship a product to market, but also that experiences should help you reinforce and grow your DevOps culture in your organization. That being said, that's all for me. Thank you very much for listening. Yeah, you can find me on Twitter as Corti or on GitHub. And now I am more than happy to answer questions if there are any on Slack or on Zoom. So
now the audience can unmute themselves and ask questions.
I am not able to open the app actually. Yeah, there are no questions so far on neither Slack nor the Zoom chat, but someone is typing, so I will wait for that. So Anthony asked on Slack if I've ever used GitLab for a pipeline for an Android project. And the answer is, in my case, no, it's not. I actually, so in my professional experience, I always used on-premise solution. So like enterprise solution, like version of Jenkins or TeamCity. They are like completely managed by a platform team. Instead, for a lot of open source projects, I used GitHub, and I personally really like GitHub Actions. I think it already contains a lot of tools that are able to automatize the classical tasks that are needed in like in any mobile team. So if your code is on GitHub, you can definitely use GitHub Action to implement the vast majority of the suggestion I gave today. I think GitLab more or less has the same, like GitLab CI should have more or less the same capability as GitHub Actions. I don't know about the specifics, like there might be some steps that are missing that should be adapted. So Alex asked, how do you usually go about applying hotfixes to production releases? So yeah, to answer this question, I would say, so one part of this really relies on having, let's say, a strong experimentation culture. Like if you have a great tool that is able to offer experimentation capabilities, your developers will build trust on that. And then they might realize that if the app is doing something critical, they might just want to wrap it inside a feature flag. So if you're lucky enough, you probably don't need to do an hotfix because you probably already have like a tool to just shut it down or not. So that's sort of like one of the upfront approach that I would definitely suggest in the front. However, sometimes you definitely really need to ship an hotfix. And in that case, I really suggest like you generally do a point release. So if you use like stage rollout of the Play Store, you probably don't release immediately your apps, you're up to 100%. So it will start like 1, 5, 10, whatsoever. And then if you realize that it's broken, you just do a point release and you ship the point release. I hope this answered your question. I don't know if you have like specific question related to that. Yeah, okay. So there is another question on the hotfix front. So to elaborate a bit, if there are changes in master trunk-based development, what will be the best option to release a hotfix for a bug in production? We played with the idea of branching off the release tag, but that haven't settled on a solution. Okay, so my suggestion on this is to use a release-based branching. So you do a branch when you open a new release, and you have that branch opened, like, and the branch is called with the name of the release, and you have that branch opened till you release that version to 100%. If if you have to apply any hotfix, you will apply on top of the branch, and then you will merge that change back on master once, or on main, once you release to 100%. What you can also do sometimes is like do 2 pull requests, one against master and one against the pull request, the release branch, to make sure that maybe it's a, it's a fix that prevents the app crashing at startup. So your developers, they want to be able to test the app, the master version of the app. So you want to apply that on both branches. Once your app reaches 100% to the Play Store, you just merge it back. And if you realize that there is a problem afterwards, then your app is already at 100%. If I'm not mistaken, once your app is at 100%, the Play Store doesn't allow you to downscale. Like you can't say, oh, I said 100 this morning, but this afternoon I want to stop it. Maybe now is at 30%. The suggestion there is either to create a new, like a point release from the branch, like a 0.1, or just release the new version, like the version that is coming next week, probably. That depends a lot on timing also and on the impact of the problem. You're welcome. I saw someone else was typing, but then they were shy and they stopped typing. So I'm not sure. And you can also type the question on the Zoom chat if you have any. Okay, so what are some of the pros versus cons of using a monorepo? Do you recommend using a monorepo or a polyrepo? This is a question from Benton. So again, that's a good question, I would say, and it's a question worth another talk, probably. So generally, I like the principle of a monorepo because the idea is that you have all the source code in the same place, and the tooling gets simplified a lot. For example, like if you have a lot of Android libraries spread into different repos, you might end up like having KT-lint or detect configurations that are not uniform between them. And so like the code is like, you need to be onboarded on any specific repo to understand what are the conventions there. That can be even more painful if every repository has its own CI setup, because like maybe you open a pull request in repository A and there are like 3 checks, and then you open one in repository B and there are like 20 checks, and like they both fail and you don't know how to debug them because they're on different CI, and it's like, oh my God. And this slows you down a lot. While on a single monorepo, those toolings are uniform. Like KT-Lint setup or detect setup is the same for everyone. So it's easier to jump across different projects. It's easier to also share code. Like you just say, I need that folder. But there are a lot of things that are generally harder with a monorepo, specifically around tooling. Like, for example, Gradle is not really designed to work in a monorepo where there is like also iOS backend code. There are other build systems like Bazel, but for example, in my personal opinion, I think that Android development with Gradle is way more, let's call it advanced, or there are way more features than the capability that Bazel offers today. So like Bazel will miss a lot of things and you will have to find custom solution for that. That might be like a problem. So again, it depends on case by case. Definitely monorepo are great for code sharing and are great for sharing like infra setup, and like also involving developers to jump over. Like if a developer wants to do a bit of Android and a bit of iOS, is definitely easier in a monorepo setup. Feel free to ask more questions if you have any. I'm also writing in the chat. We wait a couple of minutes more. I think that's it. Feel free to write me. So I'll be in the Slack channel. For me, it's actually a bit late. So if you don't get an answer immediately, you probably know why. And also you can reach out to me on Twitter or whatever. Like I'll be more than happy to follow up with anyone there's any question.
Okay, thank you, Nicola. I will stop the recording now.